We are going to get started with our afternoon sessions today with Brian Martin from Lafayette School Corporation. Welcome, Brian, and thank you for coming.
All right. Thank you. So my presentation today is formally titled Migrating to Modern Mac Management Methods. Looking back at that, I think it would probably be better to call it my journey to modern Mac management methods, but we'll get started here. I'm Brian Martin, as she said. I'm the Apple Systems Administrator for Lafayette School Corporation. We're a reasonably sized school district in Lafayette, Indiana. I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired of taking notes and having to write things down feverishly in sessions, so I made sure to put links to the slides and the scripts I'm going to share. On Jamf Nation, I'm Black Hole Mac. So the agenda today is I want to talk about the JNUC effect versus our fleet. And I'm going to talk about what that means in a minute. Going to try to inspire you folks to change, because last year, quite honestly, I left here pretty inspired to change myself, and how you might surmount some of those roadblocks to change, and ultimately working toward implementing a better environment for you folks. So last year, the JNUC effect, I go to, say, 12 or 13 sessions throughout the conference. I leave with 10 to 20 great ideas, but usually I will sit and think them to death or whatnot, and a lot of them end up getting punted to wish lists. I specifically ran into a lot of sessions last year about getting more of a self-service mindset in your users and hearing about the demise of imaging and whatnot. And then I left the conference with an 8 to 10 hour drive back to Indiana to think about everything I learned. Like I said, I'm a person who likes to think things to death. So when I got to the hotel for that night, I was thinking things to death so much that I decided, I want to see a snapshot of our Mac fleet from a 30,000 foot overview. And I realized I didn't have a single client on 1013 or 1012 last year. I actually was still rocking 1011, a small amount of 1010s, 10.9s, and oh yeah, I had 2 machines running Snow Leopard. Looking pretty bad there. I knew that within 2 years, I was due to refresh about 100 to 150 Macs in our fleet. Very sobering. I just got done stopping thinking about the whole thing and focused on talking to my sons for the evening. So I have 2 5-year-old boys, and talking to them sometimes makes me feel better. I decided I wanted to read them a story that night. And, I read to them The Berenstain Bears Get Stage Fright. Probably very applicable here as I sit and talk to a group of people that I don't normally talk to on a day-to-day basis. In the book, Sister's mama told Sister, first of all, Sister got the lead in the play, and Sister's mama told her that she was to learn her lines line by line, page by page, and she'll be fine. So I decided if I'm going to solve our mess of a Mac management system, I'm going to have to solve it bit by bit, element by element, and problem by problem, or otherwise it's going to stay how it is and just not get fixed. So I get back to the office a couple of days later, and I start looking at our first problem, or our first roadblock to change. Do y'all remember Jamf Pro version 9.3 where they had you migrate the end users, and then if there was a problem with the migration, you had a weird resolution process? We, at the time, kicked off that migration, and it went badly. For whatever reason, we had LDAP inconsistencies, problems in the database. That migration on the old server never got finished. And last year, I think I may have referenced that when I spoke in a session about clustering, We gave up and basically moved all of our iOS devices to an entirely new JSS just to get past the user migration thing because, well, we needed zero touch for a one-to-one program. But we left the Macs on the original server. And I mean, with 5,000 iPads, 500 Macs, a lot of my focus ends up on the iOS side, not the Macs, quite honestly. So we left them alone. I thought things were working well enough. So I'm thinking, okay, do we stay on the server we're on? Do we move to a new one? Do I do it on a VM? What do I do? Turns out that failed user migration, when I looked at it a different way, became a blessing in disguise. So my iPad JSS had 0 Macs in it, was very well scaled by last year, and my distribution points had plenty of space that it could take on another share for a different JSS. So, I just decided, hey, let's build up a new Mac environment on the same one I'm building the iPads like a normal place, using one JSS. Benefit to that is it didn't really cost me anything other than just skunkworks time trying to build it out. Some other roadblocks we ran into. As you can imagine, with a fleet of a lot of legacy devices that I probably showed up there, we had Adobe CS6 in use on about half our fleet. Last I checked, I got all kinds of trouble tickets on CS6, and it wasn't working well even on 10.11 where we had it installed. Also, the next one, show of hands, who here remembers the AELP program that I'm talking about on the slide? Does anybody remember it? Okay, for those that don't, AELP was a program where you could buy 25 to 50 licenses from Apple at a time for Pro apps and iWork and iLife apps at the time. And they would give you a CD media kit and a piece of paper saying, here's how many you can put it on. Well, when the App Store came out, Apple fulfilled their terms and conditions on that by issuing me one redemption code for each title that we were licensed for, and then gave me an Apple Knowledge Base article how to deploy those apps with remote desktop. Was okay at the time. I didn't really think much on it, but DEP and VPP managed distribution didn't exist. So I just kind of kept doing what I was doing to get those apps out. And then, well, like all of us, changing things up for jollies is not something that any of us enjoy doing as IT people. This here really doesn't make a lot of sense when you look at it, but when I decided to give the old server up and start over, the first thing I did was I realized I need to talk to the end users. If I'm finding all these problems with our environment myself, what are they finding? What do they not like? You can sit there and read that. I wouldn't ask you to, but the short of it that I found was the users wanted newer stuff, access to the Mac App Store, which we were not allowing because of the problems we had with negotiating our way through AELP. They wanted more control over what was installed on their Macs. And I'm thinking about that. I'm like, why? Wouldn't you want everything that we can put on there and then you choose to use it or not? Well, when you're dealing with a 128 gig hard drive in a MacBook Air, you can't really do an install everything mentality anymore. So, okay, they wanted more control of what actually got installed on a Mac. And our techs actually wanted me to improve the imaging workflow so they didn't have to go in and choose what to image, choose a configuration, manually do that. And they wanted to make sure that I didn't get carried away with everything I looked at learned at JNUC and tried to advocate giving users admin rights. We were not ready in any way to do that. So, okay. While I was going through the process of listening to a lot of my users, I wanted to solve a technical problem. I couldn't just sit there. I wanted to make some progress. So the first thing I did was I actually took and saw what a DEP enrollment on a Mac would look like. And I got through it. But I noticed that you see this little picture here that it only really collected the username, the full name, and the email address when it pulled that user from LDAP. Obviously, we didn't have a lot defined in LDAP. That's something I later decided I want to work on. But I thought, there's got to be another way to get that department information, that building, the position, and all of that. And the answer will come here through API scripting and using AppleScript to maybe solicit that info from whoever is provisioning that machine, whether it be the tech or the end user themselves. I asked that with our new provisioning script that I kept working on, I asked very simple questions that even your most level 1 tech is going to know. What is the 5-digit sticker on the bottom of the machine? What is the building the machine's going to be assigned to? If you're in a computer lab, do I put an art lab or an art lab configuration on it, or do I put a music lab, or what group of specialty software would I put on? Is the machine being assigned to an admin, staff, or student in our district? And in the case of our labs, I wanted a room number on that because later I could probably use that for things. And when I got done building the script, here's what the setup assistant looked like. I didn't really want to put the script up on the screen just because, as you will see when you download it, there's a lot of things that you might want to consider about running it, but I did want to show off the setup process. So if this works, basically you'll choose the keyboard, the region, you'll enroll, you'll put in the creds. If it's a lab, we wouldn't have that credential screen come on. You'll choose your time zone. You'll get through that part, you guys know, but I was able to get an Apple script where you declare the tag, choose the building from a list, choose the department, choose the room number, and then is it a staff, student, or administration, and then have it drop into Jamf Helper and put the set of software we put on every Mac. And later, as I continued to fine-tune that script, even after the deployment, I had it kick on the department-specific software for labs with custom triggers. So if I had declared for a department and art lab machine, I pull a custom trigger that says Jamf policy event art, and hey, it would lay on the art software. Of course, after I spent months trying to get that script to work the way I wanted and whatnot, I found out of the wonderful existence of Splash Buddy and Dep Notify and better tools to do that. And quite honestly, after the keynote on the first day, I'm very intrigued by IBM's new open source project. I went to a session later and saw that it's going to require a little bit of Swift coding. I'm not really an expert on that, but I'm really looking forward to seeing when they open some of the keys and whatnot up to somebody like me who's a tinkerer and might be able to script it or whatnot. I think it might be able to make the process even smoother than relying on AppleScript. So when I decided I'm moving to a new server, that's a perfect time to reevaluate everything you do. I looked at our policies and I saw one particular instance. I didn't put it up on the slide, but it was quite annoying. We had a policy, or during the imaging process on our old system, we would lay on one version of the web filter. Then I had a policy that would downgrade that. And then I had another policy later that we had to write to kick it back on there. Who needs spaghetti code on a new server if we're designing that? I also found out in talking to the teachers, I would put iMovie or Minecraft on the machines like the administrators asked, but it was a classroom disturbance most of the time other than maybe coding week when they wanted it on there. So I was able to start writing policies that would, hey, maybe go after Minecraft or iMovie, put it on there, and then either tell the teachers, here's how you delete it, or I put a little policy in self-service that would just whack the binary for that. time to build some new smart groups. If I'm collecting all that location information, maybe I can build more flexible smart groups or maybe some more complex constructions. The one you're seeing up there, I actually have probably 3 or 4 people that will constantly hound me. They need an older version of iWork. They need a 2008 or 2009 version of iWork for compatibility of their documents, but honestly, that isn't really supported by Apple. I don't want to see that as a wide open self-service package on people's machines. So I get cute about me, but I also know that if you put that on there first, it won't let you put the newer versions of Pages, Numbers, and Keynote on there. So I ended up writing a smart group that specifically looked for the presence of those apps. Is it that group of science teachers that we're asking for it? Are we sure we're dealing with the staff member's computer and only those specific science teachers in those rooms? I did not want that policy to be available to, but I wouldn't have been able to do that in the old server just due to the information I didn't have. I looked back when we finished designing the new build out, and I've only got 4 static groups for my Macs. And the only reason I'm using those is occasionally I may have a one-off teacher that needs a remote desktop, or a one-off teacher that got a grant to maybe get a copy of Final Cut. So that teacher may have nothing in common with, say, the radio TV labs where I would have Final Cut automatically on there. So I keep a static group that said additional Final Cut users. Some policy examples I was able to do. Classroom printers. Now that I'm collecting room numbers and I'm collecting them intelligently from somebody who's deploying the machines, I can make sure that the right classroom printer is right on the machine. When I did my talks with the teachers, I found out that we had 2 classrooms that they wanted me to manage their dock. I mean, that sounds a little pedantic to folks that may be in the corporate world here where we don't care what the user has in their dock, but they wanted to specifically keep students from going anywhere but to the custom apps that those teachers had designed. So, okay, I can write a policy for those 2 classrooms that manage their dock, but maybe keep and butt out from managing everyone else's dock. We have machines with specialty hardware and software. I already brought up the iWork example, but we've got certain ones that I can scope down to just a particular classroom or a whole lot better with that. And for staff members, I deployed a Follow Me printer for staff members district-wide where they can print using paper cut, have it go to a queue, and then just release their badge or release the job with their badge, and it'll print anywhere in our district. Looked at our profiles. So, yeah, you think back to my old server. Back then, my philosophy was let's lock everything down other than what the end user needed to do their job or students needed to do their thing. And one of the things the end users complain about is, hey, I can't get to the system preferences to mess with the network connection. Hey, I can't get to this or that. I kind of decided after listening to them on that, perhaps I needed to write profiles that contribute to their experience, not take away from it, and some examples are up there. The managed kernel extensions was obviously new to 10.13 era machines. Apparently now I'm going to have to manage that too. I ended up doing team IDs with that, but again, most of the profiles we do add to the experience, but that being said, I'm not going to lie to you, we've got 4 or 5 profiles that are specifically for lockdown purposes, but most of those profiles are silly things like disabling Siri for standardized testing, so a kid can't use Siri to cheat on a test. Unfortunately, the testing client requires it to be disabled to do that. And of course, I was told, hey, we need to get the Mac App Store opened up. Well, I talked about AELP already, so I don't have to go into that, but I was able to solve that by working with Apple on the business end, and finally got my managed distribution licenses that I needed to move forward on that. I did want to say that if you update to Jamf Pro beyond 10.7, you can now deploy apps by device, and I don't have to be logged in as someone. So when I was redeploying those labs this summer, I actually had to be logged in as somebody and go to self-service and say, bonk all those apps on there. Luckily, I had helpers, but now I don't have to do that when the apps install at the login window. Okay, so FileVault, yay. Well, this is kind of a fun topic I'm going to get into. It did not turn out the way I planned. So I tested FileVault encryption with some hybrid keys. I wanted to deploy it. I mean, every place I've ever looked, I should at a minimum be deploying it to our staff MacBooks, I felt. I didn't really see the need to deploy it to labs, but I did want to at least make sure that my staff's data that may have student information on it was protected. I even tested retrieval of the keys in a crisis mode. That project got put on ice. Unfortunately, right about the time I was developing and trying to make sure that that worked, we had a former staff member's MacBook get taken into prosecutor's evidence. I'm not going to go into the legal cases involving that, but I was summoned over to the prosecutor's office to get them access to the machines. And we were advised that anytime FileVault is enabled, it makes the job of the police nearly impossible, or at least in our area, to get access to a machine. And as a school district, while as a private corporation, that's important. I should not be worried about whether my government has access to that, but as a school district that needs to make sure that kids are always safe, they kind of asked us to back off on full disk encryption for any platform, whether it be Windows or Mac. And as such, I was asked to table that part of the project. That being said, I continue to try to understand how FileVault works, and I actually want to have a plan to roll it out in case either something changes or, one day Apple may require the use of it. And I need to be able to wrangle it. So we'll move on to a more happy topic, patching. So I use a lot of different tools for it. I don't rely on any one, but the key is I hadn't really considered patching in our old server. I considered, hey, let's roll the labs out for a year and blow them away and set them up again next year. I decided I wanted to get better than that because between year to year, I would not necessarily have good notes on, hey, where do I get that latest copy of graphical analysis or Vernier Logger Pro, or do I still have the logins for that or whatnot? So I kind of decided for every title that we add to Jamf Admin, I wanted to have either a patch strategy or at least a bare minimum of a plan where I would go to get a new thing. The tools we use are up on the screen. I mean, I use patch policies for things like Adobe. I use auto package for random titles that may not have a good software updater. Microsoft software, if you go to Paul Bowden's training at macadmins.software, I actually find a pull strategy with MS Update a lot better than, say, a push strategy. For Flash, I tend to use traditional policies. It's just faster. I can get that Flash installer up on the server and forget the logs a lot faster than I can trying to maybe use the patch system. And I've actually told Jamf that. I'm like, I want to be able to see a way how I can get, as soon as I know there's a Flash upgrade, I want to get it out and get it out there so I don't have people complaining that Flash updates don't, or Flash sites don't work. And then software update and Mac App Store, that one's pretty self-explanatory. If you're adding Mac App Store apps, you can either keep them up to date or not, and most folks here know how to use the software update command. For anybody who's needing some good ideas how to get started with patch, they had a really good deep dive session earlier today. I'd be watching out for the videos, but Last year they had a really good session on patch for beginners, and Jamf actually in their training material has some pretty good settings. Then, like I said, Paul, he has that on macadmins.software, but he has a training course published on that website that tells you the ins and outs of how you wrangle a MS update. So, yeah, lots of development work, lots of new policies, patches, profiles, smart groups, all that good jazz. Yeah, to make all that work, I swear I had a fleet of 2 or 3 MacBook Airs that I reimaged 50 to 100 times, or reprovision, wipe, whatever you're going to call it. Took me 50 to 100 times of doing that just to get the experience to work the way I wanted it to. When I finally thought I had it good, I went ahead and I didn't put that on the slide, but we piloted in 2 labs, and the teachers seemed to be a little happier. We piloted that being able to remove iMovie and Minecraft in those. That was one thing I wanted to check out. Things seemed to go pretty well. So then we move on to the summer, this last summer. We actually, at that point, got out NetBoot one last time and switched all the machines in School Manager, which, by the way, I got lucky on one thing. I don't know how lucky y'all may get on this, but when I plugged all of our serial numbers into DEP or School Manager, I only had 8 machines that weren't DEP capable. I was pretty lucky. I was able to get through the lab machines in 4 days with a couple of helpers. All the lab machines were able to be reprovisioned, and I have been, ever since the end of reprovisioning the lab machines, scheduling staff members as they're available to bring their MacBooks in. We'll swap it out for a new one. We'll take their old one back and give it to the next person who comes in. Last minute gotchas, so we've got 10.13.4. I mean, I think I already covered that we had to do kernel extension profiles, but we started in 10.13.4 also seeing secure token warnings, and I'm like, well, what is secure token? Well, did a little bit of research into that, and that was related to FileVault and chain of how you start with the original setup assistant user and you grant everybody who logs in secure token from that. But given that I wasn't using FileVault, I really wasn't too worried about that. I more just wanted to make the message go away. Well, luckily in 10.13.5 they gave me a key that I could do that, and I put the profile in with the presentation materials that I used. Mac App Store apps, we already covered that they require a logged in user if you're dealing with a Jamf Pro instance that's earlier than 10.7. And, you know, I never want to get into a rut as bad as we were again, so I need to keep moving forward with everything. I told you I was able to refine the provisioning scripts just a little bit to get department-specific software out there. Mac App Store apps, I now do those by device. We've covered that. I got through the conversion from MyISAM to InnoDB. I collaborated with our AD admins a little more. I'm tired of having to script everything that we need in there. We got to get some LDAP information in. So one of the fields I've got now for that is the position field. I'm now able to get that from LDAP. I've got a lot more after this particular conference. So these were just what I thought when I was building the slide deck, but I want to see our end users for the first time in our district's history upgrade their own OS without us having to be involved in the process. I've learned techniques how to do that today, and I'm kind of ready to implement them once I start learning or getting through the writing of all the TCC profiles we're going to need. I want to get a little bit more with patching. I don't necessarily want to patch everything right when it comes out, but I want to do more of the patching so there's less likely to be a security risk that would come with leaving old software on there. And, you know, when I was working with those other techs to get through the labs in 4 days, I really don't like internet recovery, and and obviously NetBoot is a thing of the past. I actually have a T2 laptop now, and being the doofy geek that I am, the first thing I do when I get it out, I don't try to boot it up and set it up. No, I boot to internet recovery and say, is there any way I can hack it and make NetBoot? No, there's not. That was wishful thinking on my part. One of the things I want to do after having sit through this year's JNUC, though, is I want to actually get Nomad out. I'm tired of binding to AD. That's pretty much it. I actually love the Q&A part more than I do the sitting there talking. I'd rather find out what you're going through and maybe let you pick my brain for what it's worth.
Do you make your smart groups based on naming convention? Or do you extension attributes? What's your
I
method?
tend to do them more ad hoc because typically I'm the one who's creating them. I don't use the API to create them. I probably could if I get a little more sophisticated. But right now I tend to, like, I may do has Final Cut or staff users, or for instance, one of the rooms, our high school has a really weird room numbering convention, so your average room might be called 2A4F. That may be its room number. So max in 2A4F. Just, I name it whatever.
Then how do you target those? How do you scope those in?
So I say room number equals 2A4F, and I say student machines in 2A4F, because a teacher machine I may want to say do something to just the student machines, but not necessarily have it affect the staff members' machines.
Okay, so you have your technicians answer those questions.
I do. So that you saw the video on that. It went a little too fast. I apologize.
Okay.
I was truncating that.
I get the concept.
What I do is I have either the staff member or the student. I mean, those are pretty simple questions. If you don't know what building you're in, yeah, that's a problem. Maybe you're a new teacher, whatever. The asset tag on all of our Macs is a sticker on the bottom of the box, or if it's a brand new one, it's going to have come through our office because we want to make sure we order it and have it be DEP compatible. The position, you know, I give them a 3-button choice. Are you an administrator, a teacher, or student? That's, you know, not a hard question to answer. It is quite annoying that we have 5 different prompts there, and that's why I'm really excited about the IBM thing, because, you know, I could see replacing, asking for that department or whatnot. I could see how Fletcher had the productivity bundle, just the developer bundle, just all those bundles. I could totally see that workflow working well with what I'm trying to do.
So, I'm sorry to beat you up.
No, that's okay. Please.
How technical? I'm asking a question.
Please.
So, your technicians answer those questions.
Yep.
But then do you save those to, how do you?
I make them into
track
a
that?
variable in the script. So this is where I
Okay.
wish I would have put the script up on the screen. I actually will say department name equals OSA script -E, tell application finder bloody 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 blah to put this up on the screen. The technician answers it, it captures it to a variable, and then as part of that provisioning script, it uses the API to upload it to the JSS. Once it's in the JSS, I have other scripts later that need that information. I just do a get command instead of a put command on it.
So you stored all that in Jamf?
Yes.
And then you build your smart grips from it?
Yes,
I'm with you.
exactly.
We've tried to do that on our Windows images for years with a naming convention. You know,
Well, so
whether or
that's
not
why
it says lab, whether or not it says lap.
I definitely would love to talk to you afterwards, because one of the things about that particular script is our naming convention. We have a very, I don't know other school districts what kind of naming conventions you might have, but ours is building code, which is a 2-digit number, dash asset tag with the word Mac appended to it. That's how you know it's one of ours.
Right.
That's how it's been even before I hired in 12 years ago, and I'm not going to change that. There's no reason to change it. But I actually was able to, okay, how would I get that programmatically? So when they choose that building, I look up what building code maps to that, and I say, if building equals, say, Jefferson High School, issue code number 20. If building equals Sunnyside Intermediate School, then cost code equals 3. So you do that, and then the same with the asset tag. They put a 5-digit number in. It does build, and then when I get to naming the machine, I do SCUtil building code dash department name or dash asset tag, and add the word MAC to it at the end. I would love to actually bust out the code and talk to you about it, because the naming.
Do you bind to AD at that point as well?
Yes, we do. And in fact, even when you choose that building name, so I'm that pedantic, I want to put it in the right OU in AD. So I actually said, if you choose Jefferson, okay, it's going to go into OU equals Mac, OU equals computers, OU equals Jefferson, blah, 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 blah.
Hi, sir. First off, thanks for the great presentation. I think it was awesome for
Thank
any
you.
educational environment and a lot of different departments and whatnot. Just quick question on the reprovisioning portion.
Yes.
Any thoughts on what you're going to do for those old traditional hard drives that aren't on APFS? I mean, are you going to use JAMF imaging?
Okay, so what I'm going to do on that is, I know that they started supporting Fusion drives in 1014. I know they started supporting that. I haven't tested whether they're going to support, say, traditional SATA drives by themselves with APFS. But if they are, I mean, even if they're not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put out that install macOS Mojave app to the machine, and I'm going to call it as an upgrade. I'm not necessarily going to do an erase install this time. But once I have it on APFS, I can see that workflow being available and do an erase install. I would gladly show you what I know about that command, which isn't much. I look it up online, but my thought is I'm going to get the binary out onto the machine. I'm going to cache it onto the machine, and then I'm going to call it from a self-service policy, let the user invoke it, and I'm going to have it run just as an upgrade process, which kind of scares me a little. I've been more of a nuke and pave guy for all these years. But yeah, I guess these days we're not nuking and paving anymore.
Yeah. And roughly how many computer labs do you manage at this?
Okay, so I've got 2 art labs, 2 music labs, a lab of music practice rooms, 6 science labs, and 2 MacBook carts at one of our middle schools.
So this might be a slight tangent from
No, that's fine.
what you were talking about, but you did mention in your presentation of how you were taking in old MacBooks or a MacBook that a staff member was currently using.
That's correct. It would be a
giving them
MacBook.
another one.
Yeah.
Working with this one, then I believe you mentioned that goes to then the next staff member who comes in. Am I understanding correctly?
That you kind of are. So I would make an appointment with the staff members. So their appointment, they would come in to one of us. We would back up their data, or we'd tell them, hey, put your data here if we're not going to do a data transfer. Once they've done that, I would go ahead and build them. I've got like 4 or 5, those same 4 or 5 MacBooks I talked about reprovisioning 50 to 100 times. Those are spares as part of the same pool. So what I do is I maybe give the new staff member, or the staff member who brought in that MacBook, one of those, put their data on it and send them on their merry way. And then I take theirs once I know that 2 or 3 days later they haven't lost any data. I take theirs, wipe it, and do the same thing with the next person who comes in.
Okay, so in that situation, do you have anything in place to handle, like staff responsibility for the devices, the physical wear and tear on them?
No, we don't. That is
Okay.
something that we desperately need, in all honesty, because I have had staff members that departed at the end of the summer, and I get one that has clearly been dropped, but the gentleman did not tell me it had been dropped. I hadn't looked at it because somebody else took it in, and I'm like, well, great, now the keyboard's being wonky, I can't use this, he's gone, and nobody's going to pursue it. I guess I've got one bad MacBook now.
Because as much as I love that idea, the hill to try to overcome there that I think would exist would be if you have staff members who say, well, this is worse than the one that I had before.
Okay, so what I could do there, like if I did have such accountability, we have a department secretary that works in the building literally next door to ours. What I could do is say, have the user start with her, she updates the records, and then I do my thing.
Okay.
I could do something like that if we're going paper, or, maybe, unfortunately, I'm not much of a programmer. Maybe we could get somebody to design some sort of website or a Microsoft Flow type thing that would cover that, but just making sure, hey, I remove your responsibility for asset tag 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but I add to you responsibility for asset tag number 98765.
Great. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. All right.
All right. Brian, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.